late November 1908, John J. McCoy, chief engineer on the DM Clemson, phoned his family just before the ship left Two Harbors. His wife recently passed away and his two small children were left in the care of their housekeeper while their father was away on the lakes. He phoned to tell his young housekeeper what to do if something ever happened to him. It was the final voyage of the season, and the DM Clemson, completed in 1903, was one of the largest and best equipped freighters on the lakes. While she was simple, she represented a new generation of ever larger ore carriers that came to dominate the Great Lakes. There was no reason to believe that this last voyage would be anything but routine, but John McCoy seemed to have a premonition. Not satisfied with their first call, he phoned once again while the ship offloaded her cargo in Lorain, Ohio. He gave his instructions one last time, making sure that his housekeeper understood. Then he said one final goodbye. Only a few days later, the DM Clemson vanished on Lake Superior. She remains one of the largest Great Lakes shipwrecks to remain undiscovered. Her fate is one of the greatest mysteries in the history of Lake Superior. Thanks to Ridge for sponsoring this portion of today's video. Can you believe that it's already gift-giving season? The most stressful part of the holidays for me is figuring out what to get folks who are hard to shop for. Ridge wallets and accessories make the perfect gift, even if it's for yourself. Ridge wallets come in a slim profile that easily fits in your front pocket. They hold up to 12 cards with plenty of room for cash with a built-in cash strap or money clip. They offer tons of options with over 50 colors and styles, including carbon fiber and leather. I went with the simple, sleek, black titanium, and I love the minimal design. So if you're looking for a great gift for friends, family, or even just yourself, check out Ridge wallets and key cases. Get up to 47% off the best holiday gift using my link, ridge.com/bigoldboats. Thank you again to Ridge for supporting the channel. And now, back to the DM Clemson. Before dawn on November 20th, 1908, the DM Clemson slipped out of Duluth Harbor into Lake Superior with a load of 8,000 tons of iron ore bound for Ashtabula on the south shore of Lake Erie. The 1,000-mile voyage south was the first leg of her final voyage of the season. After dropping off her cargo, she was scheduled to pick up a load of coal and return north, finishing off a long and demanding season. Captain Sam Chamberlain was eager to get his ship off the lakes. It was already bitterly cold, and a late-season run like this one would almost certainly encounter rough weather. But he was confident that his ship could handle almost anything the lakes could muster. Labeled Yard Number 510, the DM Clemson was built at the Superior Shipbuilding Company in Superior, Wisconsin for the Providence Steamship Company. Completed on July 3, 1903, the Clemson was one of the largest ships on the lakes when she entered service, coming in at 5,531 gross tons. She measured 468 feet or 143 meters in length with a beam of 52 feet or 16 meters. The Clemson represented a new era on the Great Lakes. For years, wooden freighters dominated. White oak was plentiful, giving these simple ships a clear economic advantage. But by 1898, the cost of steel dropped significantly, while the once seemingly endless supply of hardwood seemed to dry up. By 1903, steel was cheaper than wood. At the same time, trade on the Great Lakes was booming. In 1889, Lake Superior made up only 21% of commerce on the lakes. By 1906, fueled by a growing demand for the raw materials required to make steel, Superior accounted for more than half of all trade. Greater demand and cheaper building practices created ever larger freighters. While their design remained simple, their size ballooned, squeezing in extra cargo holds, all to maximize the profits of every single voyage. The DM Clemson was one of these new freighters. Driven by two Scotch Marine boilers that fed a single triple expansion steam engine capable of generating just 1,800 horsepower, like most lake freighters at the time, she was chronically underpowered for her size. But she was relatively new, and her 24 crew members no doubt felt a sense of pride and security working on one of the largest vessels on the lakes. Only a few hours after leaving Duluth, the DM Clemson sailed into a violent gale, one of the worst Captain Chamberlain had ever seen in his 30 years on the lakes. Massive swells slammed into her stern, sending water flooding into her aft quarters. The skylights over her engine room smashed open and waves washed up the entire length of her spar deck, slamming into her forward deckhouse. Every wave that washed over the ship left behind a thick layer of ice. The pilot house windows were so hopelessly covered in ice that Captain Chamberlain finally ordered second mate Charles Woods to break out the glass with a fire axe. For 2 days, she struggled through the storm, barely making any headway at all. But she managed to hold her own. When the storm finally cleared, the DM Clemson resumed her course to the Sioux. She arrived covered in a thick layer of ice, which her crew promptly went to work breaking away. By the time they were ready to resume their voyage south, the most serious damage had been repaired. They soon arrived in Ashtabula, where her cargo of iron ore was unloaded, and by the evening of November 27th, she headed to Lorraine to pick up a load of coal for her return voyage. Before taking on her new cargo, Captain Chamberlain closely inspected her hull, looking for any signs of damage sustained during the storm. Despite the considerable strain she endured, he could not find a single crack, wavy plate, popped rivet, or any traces of flooding. He beamed with pride when he reported the lack of damage and boasted, "She is a solid ship." On November 28th, the DM Clemson arrived in Lorraine, Ohio. It was Thanksgiving and the dock workers were off for the holiday. Whether in port or underway, ships on the Great Lakes always made Thanksgiving special. The Clemson's chief steward, Bert Balfour, was no exception. He took pride in providing one of the best meals on the lakes for the holiday. Roast turkey, chestnut dressing, gravy, mashed and sweet potatoes, roast duck, Virginia ham, Yorkshire pudding, salads, and pumpkin pies. It was a feast that rivaled what most of the men were accustomed to at home. A small comfort to make up for a holiday away from loved ones. After a day of celebration on November 29th, the coal chutes roared to life and began filling the Clemson's cargo holds for her return voyage up north. Early that morning, 2 deckhands approached First Mate McLeod and told him that they would be leaving the ship. During the storm that ravaged the Clemson, the 2 young men, childhood best friends, were convinced that they were going to die. They promised each other that if they made it out alive, they were going to leave the ship for good and never dare the fury of Lake Superior ever again. McLeod paid them their dues and headed uptown to find their replacements. It was always frustrating to find new crew members on such short notice, especially at the tail end of the season. Experience didn't matter, he just needed bodies. At 8th and Broadway, he met Arthur Burkhart and James Grattan. The two graduated high school together earlier that year and had since struggled to find work. They felt lucky when McLeod offered them the job. It was a chance for solid work and maybe a lucrative career on the lakes. The 2 teenagers eagerly reported for work on the Clemson within an hour. While in Lorraine, Chief Steward Bert Balfour also paid a visit uptown to a local hardware store owned by his friend Frank Geiger. For reasons lost to history, Balfour needed a $5 loan. He put up his new raincoat as collateral and promised to come back for it on the Clemson's next trip to Lorraine the following spring. Geiger folded the new coat and placed it on a shelf. It was a calm night when the Clemson let out a blast from her horn and eased away from the piers into Lake Erie. She swung west-northwest and set a course for the southeast shoal, while her crew settled in for the last voyage of the season. The DM Clemson arrived at the Sioux on her up-down voyage at 9:30 on the morning of December 1st, 1908. When she passed through the Sioux on her downbound voyage a few days before, Captain Alan Masters, a lake veteran, joined the crowd that had gathered to watch the storm-battered ships pass through. When he watched the Clemson limp into the locks, he remarked, "This is the second time she's gone missing. The third time is the last. It always is." The old captain was referring to a storm the Clemson only narrowly survived 3 years before in September 1905. For days, the Clemson was hammered by unrelenting wind and waves. When she finally limped into two harbors 3 days late, the battered ship was missing numerous hatch covers and took on so much water that she arrived with a 4-foot list to port. But this wasn't her only brush with disaster. The 1908 season was a rough one for the freighter. On September 26, she ran aground in Buffalo while poling into the ore docks. She was easily freed, but quickly ran aground once again moments later. She was pulled free and continued her voyage with minimal damage. On October 20th, she was caught off guard by a strong current while entering the harbor at Ashtabula and pulled into the lighthouse pier. The incident damaged 10 hull plates just above the turn of her bilge and ruptured her number 1 water tank on the starboard side. The damage all occurred above her waterline. Temporary repairs were made, and she continued the season, carrying out 2 more round trips without any incident. Even after the previous storm battered his ship, Captain Chamberlain was pleased with how the Clemson handled the heavy weather. His inspections found no damage, and now, as he passed through the Sioux locks on December 1st, he felt confident that she would finish out the season strong. After dropping off her cargo, she was scheduled to head to the American Shipbuilding Company to undergo her yearly maintenance and repairs. Captain Chamberlain looked out at the locks with a heavy heart. After 30 years on the lakes, he was readying himself for retirement. The season would probably be his last, and he relished his final days as master of a fine Great Lakes freighter. Not far behind him, another Captain Chamberlain was entering the Sioux. Captain Frank Chamberlain, no relation to Sam, of the brand new 452-foot J.J. Brown, was also passing through the locks on his final voyage of the season. As he neared Lake Superior, the wind picked up and his barometer began to fall. They were in for some bad weather. As he neared Whitefish Point, Captain Frank Chamberlain had a choice to make. He could hug Lake Superior's southern shore, or he could take the slightly longer northern route that would take him more into the open lake. Since his ship was empty and riding high, he knew that it would be harder to control, and he feared that the high winds and waves would push his ship into the rocky southern shore. He set his course north. As the sun set and the winds grew stronger, the J.J. Brown watched the DM Clemson make the turn that would set them on the more southerly course. Heavily laden with her cargo of coal, the Clemson was better equipped for the shorter route, and any other captain at the time might have made the same decision. Night fell, and soon the lights of the Clemson vanished on the horizon. By midnight, Captain Frank Chamberlain found himself in the full force of a violent gale. He was sure that it was the worst storm that he had ever seen on the lakes. Even with his ship riding high in the water, swells easily crashed over his pilot house. Eventually, Captain Chamberlain ordered the engine shut down, and for 12 hours, he allowed his ship to ride with the storm. The gale pushed the J.J. Brown forward as wave after wave smashed over the ship, crashing open hatches and skylights, sending water pouring deep into her holds. But fortunately, the Brown held her own, And after a perilous 2 days riding out the storm, they finally pulled into Duluth 40 hours behind schedule. Shortly after tying to the pier, Captain Chamberlain asked about his counterpart, but the DM Clemson failed to arrive. As the hours passed, hope that the missing ship would appear on the horizon began to fade. Just after 9 p.m. on Thursday, December 3rd, the steamer Algonquin arrived at the locks on the Canadian side of the Sioux. As dockhands went to work securing the ship's lines, her captain made an alarming report. The day before, while sailing off Vermilion Point, the ship passed through a large debris field. Her captain couldn't be sure what ship the debris belonged to, but he was sure that it did not survive the storm. The report was passed on to the U.S. Life-Saving Service, and vessels on the lakes were notified to be on the lookout for signs of a wreck. Following the storm, several ships were overdue, so it was unclear where the debris might have come from. But as the DM Clemson grew more and more overdue, concern grew that the freighter did not survive the gale. Soon more ships reported sighting debris in the area, including numerous wooden hatch covers. On December 9th, a water barrel bearing the name DM Clemson was found. On December 11th, a patrol from the Vermilion Point Life-Saving Station found a life jacket from the Clemson. The jacket was fastened, indicating that it might have slipped off whoever was wearing it. Then, on December 15th, the Crisp Point lighthouse keeper made a grim discovery. While closing up the light for the season, he noticed something floating in the icy lake. It was the body of a man wearing a life jacket. The keeper and his assistant tried to pull the body ashore, but as they pulled him up, the man slipped out of the life jacket and dropped beneath the surface of the water. On December 16th, a mail carrier found another body 4 miles east of the Vermilion Point Life-Saving Station. The man had no identification. Soon another body washed ashore between Crisp Point and Grand Marais. He was the Clemson's watchman, an Irishman named Simon Dunn. Second mate Charles Wood was the last body discovered. The rest of the DM Clemson's 24 crew members would never be found. Arthur Burkhart and James Grattan, the two young men who felt lucky to land a last-minute job on the lakes, were never seen again. By December 22nd, the freeze set in and the search was called off for the season. The DM Clemson was added to the long roster of vessels claimed by Lake Superior. For decades, her wreck remained undiscovered. But then, in August 2007, members of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society thought that they finally found the missing freighter. But the find turned out to be the SS Cyprus, a ship that went missing in 1907. As of the making of this video, the wreck of the DM Clemson remains undiscovered. Some speculate that the damage she sustained earlier in the season caused her hull to fail in the heavy seas. Others believe that her hatch covers gave way, opening the ship to flooding. But without a wreck, the exact cause of the tragedy will remain unsolved. In Lorain, Ohio, Burt Balfour's raincoat remained folded on the same shelf in Frank Geiger's hardware store until the day that he died, waiting for his owner to retrieve it. Today the shop is long closed, and the coat, like its owner, is long since forgotten. The DM Clemson cheated death time and time again during her brief career. But finally she was pushed too hard, and Lake Superior claimed her prize. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, support the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you again to Ridge for supporting the channel. Get up to 47% off the best holiday gift using my link, ridge.com/bigoldboats. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps keep the channel afloat. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.